We in this thing. It is Lyrical Ones, episode 65. We are here with you. As usual, I am Cineo. Join with me, as always, fellow host, Al Fluent. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, sir. Thank you for asking. Uh, the world is, at least the world of America, is on the precipice of the height of escapism in sports. And sports can't seem to shake what's happening health wise. So it's going to be an interesting time. Different from last season for a lot of sports where there weren't many fans available, able to watch sports. But fans will be out this year for the basketball, the baseball, the football seasons, and some cities and counties are not requiring, certain health parameters. So it's going to be interesting. I play fantasy football, so I'm a little excited about that. It's a different kind of way to interact with my circle and sports, but it can be a time suck at times. But this is a time of education for me as I take on some new subjects. I guess not necessarily new, but go in depth into some subjects around my career. So I'm excited for the professional development coming this fall, this end of summer, and I think I'm just trying to be hopeful that the people who need help, people who are seeking help, will come across the help they need. It's all in a place of gratitude and hopefulness. And whenever I lift heavy during the week, my metabolism just like is up here. And so I have another meal after this conversation. So I'm excited about that too. Hopeful and grateful. How you
Hopeful and
feeling? How
grateful.
you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm you know, extending the gratefulness, extending the gratitude, um, thinking about, having gratitude. I will say that it's important for me to find gratitude in something. Um, whether or not, that means something to anybody. For easy to look at things and get so analytical and let the analyzation just, you know, you get into the details of things, and you start to make reasoning, and you start to find subjects that hold no weight, hold no value, right? They're just things to preoccupy your time with, right? Thinking about escapism. Sometimes we will do it just by reflecting on our lives and start to see things that aren't there. And finding gratitude is sometimes the best way to ground yourself, to find a way to anchor yourself to something that doesn't weigh you down, but gives you a level of stillness and balance in a world that's chaotic and sometimes messy. And so, yeah, having that gratitude right now for, appreciating the small things, right? Appreciating the thoughtful words of someone who you didn't expect for them to say something, right? Or, taking into account someone else's achievements, right? Like seeing someone else accomplish something and being happy for them, right? Like taking gratitude in that, being able to witness that, or spending time with a loved one, or, whatever the case may be. But really having gratitude for that, right? Not getting lost in a game of comparisons, but really seeing things as they are and being happy for it. So, yeah, I'm doing good. You know, another week, 65 episodes. This is the 65. Didn't get to shout it out. the way I wanted to for the 64. Shout out to Nintendo 64. We had 64 last week. And, again, FAO Schwartz, you take the 15 down there, get off the bus, walk upstairs, take that escalator, get yourself that new Nintendo console of joy. Yeah, I was 64. Now we're 65. We get into the golden years. We get into the geriatric stage. Make sure you lifting weights for your muscles and your tendons and your joints. Yeah, that's how we feeling.
Yeah, doing the work. I think it's doesn't always look like resistance. Doesn't always look like uh, fighting. Sometimes it looks like resting. Sometimes it looks like learning. Sometimes it looks like unlearning. Uh, Sometimes it looks like patience. And I think doing the work, for healing, is so important because kind of people won't do it. People won't do it for you. Like sometimes they can't do it for you. Sometimes they can provide you opportunity. I think interacting with folks, having healthy interaction can provide an opportunity for us to heal. But being open to healing, I think, allows others to help us heal. And when you talk about like joint health, um, I always think about like the parts of our body, our psyche, our our mind, our spirit, our heart that we don't interact with every day, or that we interact with but we don't acknowledge or see or focus on the regular. And in the body, right, it's the posterior chain, right? It's calves, hamstrings, glutes, lower back, upper back, right? It's things that um, engage, our backside. Things we don't interact with them on a regular basis, um, but they are supporting us. And I think when it comes to like friends and family and partners and coworkers, sometimes we have unsung heroes, unsung aides, supports in our life that we don't acknowledge that they are, working gears in our life to help us, get through the day, help us navigate. And they're part of our, crew on the ship we're sailing. And sometimes acknowledging those and saying, okay, where does the work need to happen? Where does the rest need to happen? Where does the strength need to build so that we can protect the the bond, protect the interaction, uh, not so that it sometimes protecting the interaction means creating boundaries that serve both sides. Sometimes the boundaries allow us to be our whole self, knowing that we won't go overboard because of the boundaries, or someone won't take too much from us because of the boundaries, or we won't offer too much because of the boundaries. And that's necessary in exercise. That's necessary in work relationships, where if you don't set those boundaries, those parameters, right, those ranges of motion, if you don't set those, then you're doing a lot of stuff unintentionally. It's like you said before conversation started, you come across behavior that's like willy-nilly. And the parameters, help us navigate, you know, with intention and purpose, and you say, okay, well, I know I want to work hard. I want to give 110% in this situation, but I also know that this boundary will help me not go overboard, and not overextend myself as I navigate what 110% is for me. And sometimes we learn, when we get to those, golden years, that the takers won't stop taking unless we stop giving and offering.
I mean, yeah, you bring up a valid point, a point that most people, you know, in how they interpret it, sticking with the theme of 65, sticking with the theme of not only what this episode is, but what that number means for a lot of people, because it is a very delicate time. We're talking about retirement age. We're talking about elderly. We're talking about our now, grown folks who have acquired a level of experience, hopefully, right? Age doesn't always dictate experience, but sometimes it does. And being mindful of the relationships you have with the people who are older in your life, because it's easy in a fast-paced society to take it for granted, or in a society that's about gratification, instant gratification at that. There's a generation and an era where instant gratification was held at bay.
Hmm.
There was limited means on instant gratification. I know people will be like, "Man, what you talking about? Like, what is instant gratification, bro? Elderly." We are a community. I was getting ready to say that, now that it almost escaped my mind, but a movie recently came out, and I wanted to shout out, right, my Far East Asian, Pacific Asian family members for being able to have an experience where they can see themselves on a screen, on a level or a stage, right, where they're given the spotlight, right? They're put on a pedestal and given the attention and the production and the to be seen in a capacity and a light that they haven't been able to reach, especially within the United States, let alone the world's eyes, right? To have those those markers of Marvel and Disney, and to have this big theatrical, right, kind of moment that now people can see themselves or see something that reminds them of themselves on the screen, because it reminds me of when Black Panther came out and people could then and capture the energy of what it means to have your culture represented, to have someone who looks like someone or looks like you, right? And to see that happen again, it's 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 only to highlight and magnify that we are together in this, right? As much as there is the individual, and that is beautiful, right? We try to uplift and hold to the individuality. We also have to be mindful that we're connected, and the reason why we uplift the individual is because we acknowledge that that other individual exists. We're accepting, validating, aware that us acknowledging their presence makes a difference, right? And so the same can be said for the elderly, right? The elderly, with that comes its own culture, right? Subculture, if you will, right? Time, a certain level of understanding or awareness that may be different than our own. And I know for myself, it's been difficult speaking in terms of being an adult and trying to navigate what I want out of the world. How do I maintain a relationship with people who are elderly? How do I maintain a relationship with my older aunties? Right. As people start to fade away, like I've said many times, I've lost a lot of people. And even those losses can pull you away from the ones that are still here. And so sometimes, that doesn't always mean it's great. Sometimes you might get someone elderly who you love, but you may not respect. You may have a certain level of appreciation for, but you may not have the time. You may see that they act in a way that may be manipulative, that may try to force you out of guilt to act on their behalf, right? And it's not to mix one or the other, even though that can happen. It is to acknowledge and identify in both areas. Do you take the time? And if not, why? Are you aware? Are you paying attention? Are you thinking about what is it doing to you when you go through these different events and how these different circumstances play out with people who are elderly, who are your, who, may have the wisdom and may not, right? And I think that yeah, it's crucial because it's something we don't really talk about, right? Where it's like, oh, how do I show respect? How do I make the time? What do I need to do? Where's the mindfulness? Because a part of this is me saying it because as we started talking about what the number of the episode is, that's what
Yeah.
came to mind. And when I heard what you said, when you started looking up the facts and the data, it reminded me of interactions that I've had with people who are elderly, and it held me accountable to making a difference in my actions so that those data points aren't true, right? Because it was highlighting loneliness. It was highlighting how, once people reach a certain age, they suffer from depression because they don't have a community, right? They're experiencing loss, right? They're experiencing division. People move away. There's so much fragmentation of whatever community that existed prior to reaching that age that no longer exists, right? A lot of their children grow up and are now moving out the house, getting away from home. And, for some, right, getting away from home is about getting away from trauma, getting away from challenges that are unnecessary, or getting away from that toxicity.
Right.
And sometimes we don't have the capacity or the skills to be able to communicate or navigate those relationships, or it may be too difficult to accept a person for who they are. But after a period of time, maybe you've gained those skills. And sometimes the only way that you can find out is to test your you know test your capacity, test your limitations, test the boundaries. And sometimes that means you need to hold firm to your boundaries. But I do think it's important to recognize our elders, to acknowledge them, and to know why we do or we don't, and to really be keen on how we got to this point. Because I'll say for myself, like, yeah, like some of my family, it became difficult to want to see them as they got older because you start to see people trying to manipulate, come up, and do things, right? And for me, that's tough because it's like I'm a very protective person. I'm a very loving, caring, thoughtful person. And when I see somebody who's trying to take advantage of somebody I love, it can put me into a state of defensiveness, of being confrontational. And not everybody can handle that. Not everybody wants that, even when they deserve it, right? And sometimes, our elderly may see things in a very fixated way, right? They have a very fixed view and they can't see where you're coming from, even if it's in their best interest, right? You might have a older person in your life who just loves to eat a certain type of way or has certain habits that may be just harmful to be around, right? It almost brings up that Andre 3000 verse where he's talking about, his mother smoking and wanting to challenge and prevent and stop, right? Knowing what it's doing, but also knowing and acknowledging I'm doing my own thing that could be somewhat harmful, right? And I think that there's a lot of these interwoven themes that come together at a time like this where the world is crazy. It ain't gonna stop. So, as we strive for some level of balance and sanity, I think it's a good time to really talk about and discover how how do we engage and develop those relationships with the people who've seen something that we haven't had the chance to see, right? Recently in the news, they were saying how there's a whole generation of people that were born after 9/11 and have no scope or understanding of what it was like to be there, right? There's a lot to start to have a conversation and fan the flames of empathy.
Yeah, that's true. And I think we have to also acknowledge, right, that people can be set in their ways and stubborn, right, regardless of their age. Um, but a lot of times it's based on their experiences and right in their personality, where they may hold on to, views that they've adopted or inherited, because of some level of comfort or familiarity that hinders them from being in a mind state of discovery and exploration. And that can, come across anyone at any age. where we become reluctant to experience new things or explore. And when we come across folks who society says we should respect them because of their tenured experience. And I get that, but not everyone is earning that respect. Not everyone is communicating in a way that shows respect back. Um, Sometimes you come across some entitlement, just like with any uh, any subculture, right? Any demographic. There are those who operate in the mindset of what they deserve, um, and how they deserve to be treated. And I think when we see the elderly start to lose their ground on how to dictate what happens in society, we see them kind of retreat, or they freeze, right? Or they fight. And that's kind of how we know that there's stress, right, involved in their regular life. We see in census reports saying 28%, and it's probably grown now, 28% of seniors or adults aged 65 or older, right, are living alone. And so you have like the lack of infrastructure, you have like set incomes and financial issues, on top of loneliness and sometimes bitterness that can lead to depression and sickness and death at times. And that's not even taking into account nutrition and how um, those those issues of death, those issues of sickness, those issues of depression can sometimes be avoided just in the way that people navigate nutrition. But when it comes to like what your heart needs, what your mind needs as far as nutrition, how do you feed the spirit? I think what happens sometimes is when folks end up in those communities that become vanishing communities or fleeting, sometimes it can be a struggle for them to find the motivation to kind of move forward, the motivation to kind of continue on, the motivation to kind of journey on. I've talked with folks who are talking about uh the current kind of precaution and protection that the FDA is offering or approving for the virus going around and its variants. And a person aged over 70 was focused on getting not one shot, not two shots, but a booster shot as well. And their son and grandson had the mindset of in 2 years, right, it's going to make an impact that harms you. And for folks up in age, they kind of happy if they get 2 years, right? They say, well, I don't got much time left, let me make sure that at least I can safeguard against something, and protect my quality of life. Let me keep moving, let me increase my VO2 and the amount of oxygen I can hold in my lungs. Let me do some things to build stamina. Let me do some things to build resiliency um, dexterity in my body so that, if I take a fall, as my balance, you know, starts to decrease, or my sense of balance starts to decrease. If I take a fall, right, I want to make sure that I have enough muscle to, right, not be overly damaged by that fall, that I can, use muscle to kind of slow decelerate, toward the ground. And when you're younger, there's things you don't think about necessarily, that, if I fall, or when I fall, that I could fall in the first place, that, I may end up injured and stuck at home, and not able to travel with family or friends just to a park or to the grocery store. I can't make the normal, you know, trips away from home that I usually could, you know, just because I fail. But it happens, and sometimes it can be a downward spiral, it can be a cyclical thing that challenges, like you said, those limits, and what someone can do to kind of grasp reality, community, and even their own identities. Like sometimes people, they only know themselves in a group. They only know themselves, you know, among people, and don't really get an opportunity to know themselves when they're alone. And right, just because someone is alone doesn't mean that they're lonely. And as people learn to be alone and not be lonely, they have opportunity to, again, pass another limit and reach out to people and interact with, more knowledge of self and more awareness of where they are, who they are at, a new stage in life, a different stage in life, right? It's like at some point society stops seeing you as a young person, and they start to then choose how they interact with you, how you how you're perceived in terms of capability, flexibility, temperament, personality. There are a lot of things that people narrate and make up for themselves about a person who's aged, and say this person can only do this or can only understand this because of the lack of education, their lack of understanding, their lack of use of the main or native language, the popular language, the national language. And it's different for a lot of people, but we are a country of immigrants, and when you have immigrants whose first language is not English, and you put them out in the world after they've aged 60, 65 years, 70 years, sometimes people just don't want to interact with them, just because they don't have the patience to understand how they're communicating. Because folks can do a lot with body language and pictures, but as soon as they see someone who's older and they say, oh well, this person can't really speak English to me well, so I'm going to compartmentalize this experience, to where I'm going to place a boundary and say, well, I can only offer this much energy, this much investment in this conversation, in this interaction, because I know that I will likely get frustrated trying to communicate, and in one language that they don't understand, and them communicating back to me in a language that I don't understand. And I think for me, I've become more sensitive to the way that people treat the elderly, folks who are, aged above 65, especially those who are immigrants or those who are, you know, non-English speaking folks, because sometimes young people would just say things aloud that are rude or contemptible or patronizing or condescending, knowing that the person can't understand them, but saying it to be dismissive and to say it in English so that everyone else can also dismiss or diminish or belittle this person's experience just because they don't speak English and they're not young as they used to be. And I think when we can, just operate from a space of clarity and trust and respect, right? Honoring those who, come before us, just looks like some patience sometimes. Say this person can't move as fast as they used to. They can't, lift, as much as they could before. They can't, push or pull, or walk upstairs, downstairs, right? They may need help. And sometimes folks that say, well, I don't have the time or the energy or the bandwidth to help someone who I know is going to be in need of, what I can do for them. And I think the preconception that, folks who are older are less capable, just takes the connection out of it, takes the human connection out of it. It says, well, you are this because this is how I see you. Not you are this because this is how you identify and it's what you told me. And I think we can take that example into a lot of our differences and say, once you share with me your identity, right, then I can, right, receive that, share my own, or, become more interested and invested in who you are as a person just because I'm willing to hear your story.
I mean, what does it look like for you now to interact with elderly people? I know recently you brought it up on in conversation around like you know seeing people who are kind of up in age, right? Who've had put some time in, right? Push themselves physically, right? But what is that? What does that look like? Like, what does that mean to you, right? Because they're not coming in as an individual saying, "I want your individualized time." They're like stepping into a class where you got a range of people with a range of abilities who, their capacities may be a little bit more, a little bit extra, right, than their wiser elders or counterparts who've had more time here.
True, true, true. I think the way that I interact, and it is again always about setting like a starting line, um, and saying, okay, this is who they are, right? In their own mind, right? In their own perspective, this is what they think they're capable of. This is what we're going to show them they're capable of, and then this is also where we're going to start as we move forward and progress, you know and make progress toward what they're capable of. And that's always my, I think that's, yeah, like that's regularly my scope, is that I want to know, um, a little bit of the story, a little bit of their experience, and then a lot of, what they hope to get out of interacting with me. Um, because if they have an idea of what they hope to receive from me in this interaction, there's a small bit of trust that they're placing in me and my experience, and saying, I trust you to help me make a change. I trust you. I trust you to, to help me progress. Um, and I trust you to assist me on my journey of empowerment. Um, because I know that I'm not empowering them. They're the ones that's showing up. They're the ones that's being consistent. They're the ones that's, saying, okay, this is something that I want to do for me or for my family or my grandkids, or, for someone, even my friends who are also here with me, or my friends who are also, who I maybe want to inspire as they're in the same phase of life as me. So many people have different reasons for showing up. And, for me, I just want to make sure that I'm paying attention and hearing and seeing those reasons in, from their perspective, not mine, before I, you know, offer any kind of input and advice or insight. I just want to know who they are as they come to me. Um, I think that started with my grandmother, and as she, got up in age, I didn't always know what she was doing daily. And so I had to set the intention. I had to set the intention to kind of ask, Grandma, where you going, or what you doing today? Where you headed today? And when I started to ask, right, then I got to know a little bit more about who she was now versus a story. And so that when she passed away, I knew how she was spending her life, and I knew how she, was like interacting with the world. Um, and then because we were interacting more, um, she knew where she stood with me, and I knew where I stood with her. Um, yeah, but I think it came from just like wanting to know her better, as I got closer to her, and knowing there was never, I was never thinking, oh, right, she won't have much time left. It was more like I don't have, I have to make time really, to spend time with her in the same way that she made time for me when I was younger. Um, and it all kind of wove back into, what are the important things in my life, and work should always be taking a back seat to that.
I feel that. I think that that highlights that you create the boundary within yourself to say what is what, right? To say, you know, I know I gotta work, but work is not gonna dictate how I interact, or it's not gonna overtake what it is that I value for myself beyond the work I do. I think it's we often talk about goal setting, but we don't even talk about like personal valuation, right? Like how do we value our values, right? How do we hold on to them? How do we place them in our lives so that they don't become this abstract, esoteric, detached thing, and that they're actually a part of our everyday practice of living. This, every day you wake up is another opportunity, right? It's another moment, right? You're granted whatever's before you, in front of you. And, I'm not trying to invalidate or minimize what anybody's going through. That's, I say it's the practice as much as I breathe, and I'm intentional with my breath to take a deep breath and a release and exhale. I also want to say, yeah, I'm not saying you got it like that, but
That's right.
you do have this moment, right? And so when we look at, there's someone who I have a high admiration for, respect for, and what they used to say every time, I have a lot more behind me than I got in front of me.
That's right.
And when I think about that statement, right, I got a lot more behind me than I have in front of me. I have to take into account that the time I have with them is more precious to them. And it's precious to me because I understand that, yes, as much as nothing is guaranteed or promised in this world, they have a conceptualization that they ain't got as much as I got. So whatever I'm able to receive from them, right? Not only is it time that is limited, but it's them leveraging all the time they spent to give me something of high value that's concentrated over the years of experiences they've had. Where, yes, time doesn't always grant you the amount of experiences, but it can grant you some unique situations. It can grant you some some light bulbs, some 2 cents that over time have gained a lot more value than just the 2 cents that you may think they've given you.
Right. Because even if it's not right, like high value, it's still like something that's got a limited time, right, to be around. And they say, well, like matter is not lost or created, right? It's only transformed. And I think their stories, their perspective, right? It's just transferred energy. I always think about the anime when someone puts their fist on their heart and they put their fist out to get for the fist bump. It's like, I got something to tell you, but I can't tell you in words, right? I gotta tell you, with this energy. I gotta tell you with with my intention, right? With my focus, right, on you, and draw your focus into me, that we may find understanding and being attentive to one another, even for a moment, that we could be attentive to one another, and it not be a fleeting thing, but an intentional thing where we say, okay, what do you have to share with me? I am open and receptive to that, and then I will cherish and keep that which you are sharing with me. And right, I see it in like a high school sports, anime. You'd be like the the third years or the upperclassmen, right? Be about to graduate, right? It's our last tournament. This our last time in the inter high. So like it's our last fight, right? It's Goku, getting up there in age, right? Say, I ain't got it this time, and they trust the folks coming behind them to carry the energy, the lessons, the experience, and the most important parts of their experience forward, right? As they become memories, I guess. And I think the earlier we start seeing ourselves as teachers, we learn more. right? We make space for new, right, new experiences, new lessons, and again, that comes from that intention of, right, like the folks behind me, there's something that's modern that I don't have an understanding of, and as I'm in front of them, there's something that's traditional, right? They may not have an understanding of, and as we can merge those things in our experience, right, we can bring right, sometimes innovative ways to approach things, but I think more than anything, we can bring communal and um, trustworthy things into those spaces and interactions where you say, okay, well, what y'all doing now is cool, but this is what we used to do, and this is why we used to do it. And if you can understand the whys of what we are doing now, you can create your own whys and have some kind of foundation, take it or leave it, but at least where it came from. And like right now, what's on your mind when you interact with folks who are, up there in age, um, in whichever arena, you're in, what is your kind of your focus and purpose in interacting with them? As I bite into this Gyro.
I mean, enjoy the next meal. But when it comes to my relationship with the elderly, with the people who I respect or the people who I admire or love or people who just got a little bit more time on me, I, as I stated, right, like have family members who it became more and more difficult the more and more losses I had to stick around and be present, right? To like show up, to be consistent, and then to stop being consistent for myself, right? There was a boundary that needed to be made because you start to discover what is their truth, right? What is their perspective, and how does that align with, or how different is it than my own? And also, right, there's a level of preservation that you start to seek or need when you can see, it's not someone's intention to be necessarily self-destructive. If they don't see themselves as self-destructive, they're not self-destructive for themselves. Now, if I see them as self-destructive, I have to figure out how to deal that, how to process that, how to digest it. And now it's one of those things where I will always empathize, sympathize, right? Because I have family members who are no longer here, who were at one point elderly, and for whatever reason, right? You can put a list of different reasons why they're no longer here. And the ones who are still around, given experience and the things that I've been through with them, it becomes harder to maintain those relationships, or it becomes easier because sometimes they do gain more support, they do gain more resources. It does happen. And so it goes every way. But the thing that I always look at is my level of appreciation of where they come from, because I know that they have laid a foundation for me to be able to build off of. No matter how small or minuscule, no matter how indirect, or right, no matter if it holds a real world monetary value, or there was an actual thing that was established, the experiences that they have had has led to their survival in this world. Now, of course, survival isn't as a focal point as it may have once been when we were hunter gatherers, of course. But they've also seen some things, been through some things, and had to survive and endure. And I appreciate what is the lessons they learned and gained from that, because I wasn't there. I have no idea, right? Like, I have a higher tolerance than most, a higher capacity for most. I have more patience than most. So yes, I can sit there and hear them go on and on about the most random things and have a smile. And maybe there's something there for me, and maybe there's nothing there for me. But I can be there in the present and have and share that moment with them to know that they have an awareness that I'm there with them. Right? They may say things that piss me off. They may say things that I don't agree with. They may say things that I find extremely ignorant. And depending on my approach, my mood, maybe I'll address it. Maybe I'll let them just have it. Right? Because again, right, the harm you have to identify for yourself may not be the same for everybody. And for me, especially when it comes to words, I mean, I'm a little bit different, right? It's when you start to put them into action or those words start to be enforced on others, then we got problems. But if you just ignorant or don't, or you not, some people aren't willing to learn. Some people aren't around to engage in that way. Some people are just there. They're just existing. And for me, I can understand. I can hold some appreciation to just share the space. I'm not looking to change a life all the time, right? I can't change something if it doesn't want to change itself. And I mean that in the people way. I'm not saying that in a way of I'm going to eat this meal and this meal going to be devoured because that's change. But when it comes to people, I can't force no one to change, right? A person has to want it. A person has to be willing. A person has to be open. Now, of course, I have to be attentive to who they are and receptive to who they are and accept them for who they are to create a space that can facilitate that change. That's a different type of story, right? Because some people be so quick to want to get the change, right? Like my old ignorant auntie, da 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 da. But are you providing the space for them to feel vulnerable, comfortable, or
to
have the
grow.
ability to open, yeah, to grow, right?
Hmm.
Some plants will not grow in the dark. Some just don't. And
Some,
if you
I mean,
don't,
students, right? Like students won't grow if they don't feel safe in saying
exactly.
what they don't know.
And that is regardless of age, right? And so, I always appreciate what little tidbits of information, knowledge, experience, what is it that they've been through that they can share with me, because I take it to my own parents. There's so many different things I've learned from someone else, right? Their perspective, this outside perspective of my own parents. Once I'm told, right, it's like I would have never known. I would have never known you was the bully where you come from. I would have never known because the way you are with me is so patient, so sweet, so kind, so gentle. I didn't know you were the one sticking up for your friends every single time there was an altercation or situation that went down, regardless of how big they were, right? I just wouldn't know. But because I've been afforded opportunities to sit down and be patient, to be still and hear, I can now listen and have that openness to take and receive the information, right? I always refer to, my uncle who was with his brother, one of my other uncles. They were going to Texas from San Francisco, driving. And, the big thing for them was suits and Cadillacs. Once they got a job and they was able to afford nice cars and nice clothes, that's what they did. Took care of what they had to take care of, but they wanted to go visit some family, so they made the trip down. And they stop at a restaurant, and it's all white. They go inside, sit down, pull up a menu, and the waiter comes over and says, "We don't serve y'all here." And my uncle said, "Well, I don't want no y'all. I just want a cheeseburger." And my uncle snatched his brother and said, "We need to go before they kill us." And I thought it was hilarious because this is a moment in time I wasn't there, but I could see it given how he communicated, right? Like I had an uncle who worked for Muni and had shared all these different stories of what would happen on the bus, where he done almost had somebody stab him. And he didn't know until one of the passengers said, "Hey, you know that man you was having an argument with? Good thing you didn't piss him off because he had a knife behind his back, ready to snatch it out and try and stab you." And I was like, man, he didn't know until someone else brought it to his attention, but he was doing his best to mitigate and manage a situation that was tense. And this is many, many years ago. This is decades ago. Well, this is before the buses told you what stop you was getting off at, right? This is prior to seeing LED lights and all of the advances that we've seen in public transit, right? And to have those moments to share, to know that's what you went through, to know that you in a moment like, man, I'm just trying to get home, but then to
Right.
realize after, oh, I could have got killed,
I could not made it
right?
home.
Exactly, right. And you start to uncover even the other sides of your family members, right? I had a family member who, elderly. I found out when I inherited a car from them, oh, they definitely was getting around, if you know what I mean. And I was like, okay, you was out here living your life. But these are the things, right? To you start to learn, you start to understand, you start to really rationalize who you are, because sometimes you find bits and pieces of yourself in these different situations, and sometimes you find many differences. But I think it's so
That's
key,
true.
right? When you understand the significance, the status symbol for someone at a certain point in their life to be like, yeah, I wanted a Cadillac because it held a level of prestige for me, right? Think about how people talk about driving foreigns, or the appreciation for automobile that comes from somewhere else. And this person's like, I want this American made car that signifies a level of status and societal worship. And you hear it in songs, or you hear it in music, and there's of course a gap, because yeah, no longer is it Cadillac, it's something else, right? But there's those similarities, there's those parallels, there's those ties that bind. And I think that yeah, for me, those to like have those conversations, they add a level of comfort to know, where did you grow up, right? Like I remember one of my uncles was talking about, like, we they was like, we throw cow dung on everything. You sick? Let's get some cow dung tea. Or you cut your foot open? Let's throw some cow dung on it. And I'm like, man, you wild. He was like, oh, you don't even feeling good? We used to
Hold
do we
on.
used to get the cow dung. And I'm like,
Mm-mm.
yeah, um, yeah, that ain't for me.
Yeah,
Can't do it.
no, that's not. I didn't grow up there.
I didn't grow up there, right? But I get it, and it's hilarious because I'm laughing, I'm enjoying it, and
That's
he's
wild.
dead serious. But that's the thing, right? It's like these are the different situations that I would never have access to if I just didn't ask. Like, what was it like growing up in Marshall, right? What was it like growing up in El Salvador? What was it like growing up in these areas? And yeah, you know, picking cotton, right? Like people think it's so far away, but sharecropping, right? Like that was an extension, right? To like not have you don't get free and then you given a ticket. You're not given something, right? You just free. You still, what are you left with? What skills do you have? What's passed down to you, right? What opportunities are you afforded? Well, this is what we know out here. Maybe we could go west. We could find something else, right? Maybe we go north. We could escape something. It's so much to think about, but it is crazy when you have those conversations and they give you those little tidbits of information that only create that much more of a vivid picture in your mind of what was going on, of what they had to overcome and go through. And I appreciate that. And on episode 65 of the Lyrical Ones, sometimes we got to listen to the ones who wrote the lyrics before us, right? For the words that we speak are only the reflection and the concentration of language as it's been passed down. I mean, we are just reflections of many generations that have manifested itself in this current moment. And it's easy to be like, I don't care about all that. But we all come from something. And even if you don't have that relationship, I'm hoping at some point you can develop it because it's profound. Maybe there's some dissonance in your heart, your soul, your mind, your body. And sometimes you may get a little bit of closure, close a loop or two, and you can stop certain cycles that were harmful or are currently harmful from like occurring, reoccurring. because you can identify where they went wrong or what they didn't do, or maybe what they did do that you're not doing, or that you should do, or what you probably won't ever do. Because yes, cow
Or
dung tea ain't gonna be for me.
like you said though, right? It's like you find where you're similar. Say, oh, I am like this, maybe not because of them, but in alignment and with the way they saw the world, I see the world similarly. And because we see the world similarly, we are approaching our environment in a similar fashion, right? And we talk when you talk about like, oh, what skills do I have? Right? Folks are still doing that today, right? When they drop out of high school or they graduate high school and they're already in a space of these are the skill sets I have. This is what I'm capable of, and I'm gonna take it, to this arena, right? It's like I'm taking my talents to South Beach, right? Taking my talents to the auto body shop, right? It's like folks were doing that when they got off ships, right? They couldn't speak the language, right? But they said, well, let me show you I can sew. Let me show you that I can do this. And it still became the case, right? When folks were freed, right? It's like the limited opportunities they had were, a lot of it was based on the greed of the system in a way that the system didn't really change much. You know, the economy didn't really change much in terms of what was of value and what was not of value, right? It's like there are enough workers that we don't have to pay them much, right? And so we're still in that space, right? It's like there are enough people working minimum wage that we don't need to raise minimum wage, right? We are getting enough taxes from folks working minimum wage, right? That we don't need to do nothing, right? We're getting enough, right? Property taxes, right? Rental fees from franchises hiring people for minimum wage that we don't need to raise that, across the board, across the country. That's not necessary because we got some states who are just content saying, right, this is all they can do. Right, some cities saying, right, this is all I can do is tend to the tend to this, one trade. And we always got to be mindful, like some of the stuff, right? You like the perspective that you had, right? Somebody had it before you. Um, it's like you said, somebody wrote the lyrics before us, right? How can I sample this track, right? Maybe I don't want to make it legendary. Maybe I just want to express myself, right? And the sampling is taking an experience that resonates with me and adding my experience to it. And I think when we get to interact with those folks who are, 65 and up, and those folks who are experienced things before us, right? It's like if you got an opportunity to collab with Duke Ellington, you might as well do it now, right? Say, Duke, this is my experience, but before we get to that, let's talk about your experience. Let me hear about your experience, right? Because I'm here to learn, and for a lot of great artists, right, they're also right there to learn, even if they've been dropped 10 albums, 14 albums, right? Al Green was still in the space of like, let me cover these songs from the Beatles. Let me cover these songs from Aretha Franklin. Let me cover these songs from wherever, because I want to add my experience right to their experience. So that's what I hope is that we could keep sampling from each other, collaborating, and you know, yeah, making beautiful music.
Episode 65 of the Lyrical Ones podcast, as we talk about our ties to our heritage, our legacy, and to our elder loved ones. Legacies were made off of driving buses. Legacies were paved off of building the structures that you live in all around you. Legacies were made from almost everything you see being taken for granted at some point. There is a legacy being made from that. Um, you know, I'm I'm saying this for everyone. I'm not saying this for any specific person. How much you maintain your culture, I have a firm belief grants you an infinite amount of success. How tightly you hold to your culture. Because the new culture sometimes is destructive to the culture that you were granted, that you were given, that was passed down to you. You have to be very careful because you can definitely forfeit one for the other. And the other, it'll never appreciate in time, especially if it's destructive to something that had value. So yeah, the culture, right? Your culture, whoever you are. I'm not talking about the shade of skin or the nationality you come from. I'm saying your culture passed down to you. How tightly you hold on to it will grant you infinite amount of success. And I'm not saying success in monetary. I'm saying success however you see fit. Because I am a firm believer the more you can hold on to there are parts of our cultures that are very destructive, very harmful, very toxic.
True.
But there are parts of our culture that help us grow, that give us a platform, that give us something to stand on, right? I'm not saying it's absolute in its form. I'm saying you have to refine it as you continue to carry it on because you're the one, right?
That's all of
You
our
are the next
cultures.
one. Yes, exactly, right? But there's a new culture, right? It came around, I want to say, the late 70s, early 80s, this culture that was very disruptive to all of our cultures, wherever you come from. And I mean, I'm not gonna lay it all out for you, right? Because I've laid out quite a lot, but I want you to think critically, right? When I say the 70s and 80s, and you start to look and see the dynamics and the shift and the changes, it follows along in a way where you can see it ripple. It exists here, and it exists all over the world. But you have to be very mindful of what that is, because yes, the culture you were delivered, given, the legacy, right? I'm not saying every single bit in peace. I mean, I am saying that it's a refinement as you hold on to it, but you got to hold on to it. And the best way to get to it is checking in with your older folks. You know, Affluent. Do you have any final thoughts, final words for the people as we wrap up our episode 65 of the Lyrical Ones podcast?
Yeah, I think for me, the new culture is always changing, um, and like you said, it won't appreciate in time because a lot of it is regularly changing. Um, Sometimes the culture comes from the older sibling. Sometimes the culture comes from older friends, aunts and uncles, older cousins. Um, Sometimes older coworkers, counselors, older professors and teachers. Um, Sometimes where we adopt the culture, um, I think whatever it is, holding on to it allows it to appreciate. Holding on to it, then passing it on allows it to appreciate and become something that can sustain community and it can create community. And so, yeah, I think about, whatever the identity is that you hold on to, make sure that it's, serving you well, that it's healthy for you and your loved ones, and that there's space and there's room to add to its core beliefs and values, that it can evolve and innovate as as things change.
No, for sure. For sure, for sure. It is you know, as we always like to do at this particular time. Hold on to your cultures because I mean, just to, to highlight maybe one of the more toxic forms of our culture. Papa was a rolling stone. Wherever he laid his hat was his home, which is just the evolution of certified lover boy.
Run, 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 run.